Most Utahns know about the polygamous fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but do you know about its Canadian branch? I'm Fox 13 investigative reporter Nate Carlisle, polygamist who joined what we now know as the FLDS, set up in British Columbia in the 1940s, just miles from the Idaho Panhandle. Two brothers, Brandon and John Blackmore, have now each written books about growing up there, but Utah and one of its most infamous sons, Warren Jeffs, are discussed on a lot of pages. A warning, this story discusses sexual abuse.
My dad had five wives, so it was a polygamous situation.
The people in Bountiful pretty much lived in poverty.
Meet John and Brandon Blackmore, brothers with different mothers and best friends. Each of their books is out now. Brandon's Son of Perdition and John's Broken Promise walk readers through their childhoods in the Canadian Rockies forest and what families did to survive.
There was definitely some very not good things, but I also try to give my dad and mom's credit. Our living was very basic and pretty much day to day.
In the early 80s then, we all fell into the chicken program. So every 3 months, there was this chicken farm down on the flats in Creston, and we had to go and harvest 1/4 of the chickens in that farm. And you'd literally have a pickup full of dead white chickens.
But the real industry for the FLDS in British Columbia? Timber. And the business was controlled by Bountiful's bishop, John and Brandon's uncle, Winston Blackmore. Both brothers describe working for him in cold conditions. They watched saws and other equipment cut off workers' fingers and toes.
I actually was taken from my dad at 13 years old and put on Winston's crews, and we didn't have any choice. None of us did. We weren't paid anything.
You're pretty much viewed as property of the church. Like, you're going to do what they tell you to do. You're going to get sent where they sent you. And
Winston Blackmore, who had his own falling out with the FLDS leadership years ago, did not return Fox 13's messages seeking comment. John eventually married a woman from Canada. Brandon was married in Colorado City, Arizona, across from Hilldale, Utah. It was an arranged marriage. He didn't meet his bride until he arrived at the ceremony, and it was officiated by Warren Jeffs.
All my life I was taught he was this wonderful prophet and almost a god, and then I had to come to that realization that actually is a very terrible person.
In both books, the brothers describe being assigned to the mills around Bountiful to build huge modular log homes for little or no pay.
And it was a huge expense to supply hundreds of loads of logs into this program.
It was only years later, when looking at news stories online, they learned where those homes went. The Canadians were building for the Jeffs-controlled ranches in Texas and South Dakota. John's faith in Jeffs wavered after hearing stories about sexual abuse. Also, as Jeffs went to prison, he ordered no more intimate relations between husbands and wives. Jeffs' lieutenants were frequently interviewing people like John and his wife to make sure they were complying.
So into 2012, we just made the decision after a couple of these interviews that we were just going to be done with it.
Brandon left the FLDS about the same time. His wife and 4 children, however, stayed with the church. The couple eventually divorced. Both brothers write about how shattered families have become the new normal in the sect.
I have 3 mothers that are still loyal to Warren, my dad's first 3 wives. And we've had nothing to do with them for 12 years. And that's been really hard.
John visited Fox 13 News when he was passing through Salt Lake City. Brandon spoke to us by Zoom, but I've met him before, on a reporting trip I took to Bountiful in 2016. When I found him, Brandon was giving information to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. A court eventually convicted Brandon and John's father and one of their stepmothers of a charge for removing a child from Canada who was then sexually abused.
It was a struggle for me to testify against my own dad, but I also was in hopes that maybe it would help to stop anything in the future and send a message to the FLDS.
It turned out Brandon wasn't completely done with the Jeffs. In 2017, he married one of Warren's daughters, Rachel.
I've been a logger, a cowboy, and always wanted to get into law enforcement.
Brandon is now a sheriff's detective in the Idaho Panhandle, not far from where he grew up. John still lives in the Bountiful area. He estimates Jeff still has about 300 followers there.
And then there's the people like me that either believe what they believe and try to carry on with life, or, just don't want to be bothered and want to be, a part of a community that is free.
In Salt Lake City, Nate Carlisle, Fox 13 News, Utah.